She was blindfolded, zip-tied, and bleeding from her temple when he found her. And the first thing she said to him when he ripped the blindfold off was, "If you've come to ransom me, you should know my father will kill everyone in this room and then bill you for the bullets." Emeka Okafor looked at the woman zip-tied to a chair in the middle of a rat-infested warehouse on the outskirts of Seoul, surrounded by 6 armed men who had no idea he was already inside the building, and he almost smiled. Almost. He had 17 seconds before the patrol loop brought another 2 guards around the east corridor. He had a suppressed Glock, a ceramic knife taped to his left forearm, and the kind of patience that only comes from spending 12 years as a special forces operative in environments where hesitation was the same as death. He didn't come here for her specifically. He came because his old commanding officer owed him a favor and had called it in. "There's a girl, Emeka, taken 3 days ago. The family can't go to police. You know how it is." He knew how it was. He always knew how it was. That was the problem with being the best at what you did. People kept finding reasons to need you. But now, looking at this woman, this small, furious, perfectly composed woman with blood running down the side of her face and fire in her dark eyes, Emeka had the strangest feeling that his life was about to change in a way no amount of military training had prepared him for. "Don't scream," he said quietly, "and stay low." She stared at him. "You're Nigerian. I'm the person cutting you loose. Questions later." He sliced through the zip ties in 2 clean cuts, caught her wrists before she could stand, because she was absolutely about to stand. He could see it in every line of her body, and pressed one firm hand to her shoulder. "Can you walk?" "I ran track for 6 years," she said. "Good. Then when I say run, you run. You don't look back. You don't stop. You go through that door," he pointed to the rusted side exit, "and you get behind the black SUV parked on the right side of the lot, and you stay there until I come for you." She looked at him with those dark eyes. Something moved through them. Not fear, not gratitude, something more complicated than either. "And if you don't come, I'll come." He said it the way men say things when they've already decided the outcome and the universe simply hasn't caught up yet. She ran, and Emeka Okafor turned around to face 6 armed men. He was finished in under 4 minutes. Her name was Seo Yuna, and she was the only daughter of Seo Jae-won, a name that, in certain circles across East Asia, made grown men lower their voices when they said it. Her father ran the Seo Syndicate, one of the oldest and most feared criminal organizations in South Korea, the kind of empire built not on flashy violence but on cold, surgical power. The kind of empire where if your name appeared on a Seo family ledger, your fate was already decided, you just didn't know it yet. Yuna had grown up in silk and steel, private schools in Gangnam, summers in Geneva, a law degree she was never meant to use in any courtroom. She had been groomed not as an heir. Her father had never imagined a woman could lead the syndicate, but as currency. A beautiful, brilliant daughter, trained in etiquette and 6 languages, meant to be married strategically, to cement alliances. A jewel to be traded. She had spent 26 years quietly despising that plan. The kidnapping had been an opening move in a war she hadn't been told was coming. A rival faction, the Park Network, younger, hungrier, led by a man named Park Hyun-sik who wore designer suits and smiled like something that had learned what smiling was supposed to look like, had taken her as a message to her father. "We can reach what you love most. Step aside, or lose everything." What Park Hyun-sik had not accounted for was a Nigerian former Special Forces soldier with a suppressed Glock and 17 seconds. Emeka brought her out of the warehouse with blood on his shirt that wasn't his and the kind of quietness around him that she recognized. She had seen it in her father's most dangerous men. The quietness of people who had made peace with violence long before this particular moment. She sat in the passenger seat of his SUV and watched him drive, and said nothing for 3 full minutes. "You killed all of them," she said finally. 4. Incapacitated too. "The distinction matters to you." "Yes." Another silence. Seoul lights blurred past the windows. She could feel the place where the zip ties had cut into her wrists, and her head was throbbing where one of Park's men had hit her, and she was sitting next to a man she had never met who had just dismantled 6 armed kidnappers with the calm efficiency of someone doing administrative work. "Who sent you?" she asked. "Colonel Park, not the same Park, an old colleague. He knew your family needed someone outside of the usual channels. My father's men would have come for me." Your father's men would have started a war that painted a target on every member of your syndicate for the next decade. He glanced at her sideways. I'm quieter. Yuna looked at his hands on the steering wheel. Large hands. Steady. The knuckles were barely marked, which told her more than any bravado would have. Amateurs wore their violence on their hands. Men like this one wore it somewhere deeper, somewhere that didn't show. Take me home, she said. I need an address. She gave it to him without hesitation. If he had wanted to harm her, she'd already be dead. She had grown up in a world where reading people was the first survival skill, and everything about Emeka Okafor said soldier, not threat. Not to her, anyway. COJ1 was a man who had not shown visible emotion in public since his wife's funeral 14 years ago. He was 61 years old, compact, silver-haired, with a stillness that his enemies often mistook for weakness right up until the moment they understood their mistake. He stood in the marble foyer of his Hanamdong mansion when Yuna walked through the door, and for exactly 3 seconds, something crossed his face that was too raw to name. Then his eyes moved to Emeka, standing behind her, and the rawness locked itself away. You're Okafor's son, J1 said. It wasn't a question. I am. Your father was a good man. He was. The two men looked at each other across the foyer with the particular language of people who have both lived in worlds that don't operate on ordinary rules. J1's gaze moved over Emeka the way a craftsman looks at another craftsman's work. Appraising, acknowledging. Name your price, J1 said. I don't have one. Everyone has one. Emeka met his gaze without blinking. I did this as a favor to an old colleague. I don't need payment. J1 was quiet for a long moment. Then you'll stay the night. My people will arrange safe return travel for you in the morning. It wasn't quite a request. Emeka recognized it as the kind of hospitality that was also a kind of assessment. He nodded once. He didn't know, none of them knew, that he would still be there 6 months later. If you're new to this channel and you love stories that hit different, stories with real emotion, real fire, real love, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell. We don't do basic here. Now let's get back to the story. Yuna found him the next morning on the terrace before sunrise, doing the kind of stillness that wasn't stillness at all. It was controlled breathing. It was a body in a state of readiness even while apparently doing nothing. She brought 2 cups of coffee and set one on the railing beside him without asking. He looked at it, then at her. You didn't sleep, he said. How would you know? Your eyes. She leaned against the railing and looked out over the Han River, gray and silver in the early light. My father is already moving against Park. By tonight it will have started. I know. Does it bother you? Knowing what you walked into? Emeka picked up the coffee. I walked into a warehouse with 6 armed men to cut a woman free. I didn't walk into your family's war. You're in it now whether you want to be or not. Park's men will have recognized the work. They'll know someone came for me who wasn't one of our people. They'll look for you. He looked at her then, really looked, and Yuna felt something she didn't have a clean name for. The sensation of being seen by someone who wasn't performing anything, wasn't managing her, wasn't calculating what she was worth. Just looking. Let them look, he said. She should have gone back inside. That was the smart thing. Instead she said, tell me about yourself. There's not much to tell. That's what people say when there's everything to tell. He was quiet for a moment. Then, 12 years in Nigerian Army Special Forces. 3 years in private security consulting after that. I came to Seoul 8 months ago on contract. A corporate security assessment that turned into other things. He paused. My father was a colonel. He worked with your father's old business partner 25 years ago. I didn't know that until Colonel Park called me about you. So we're connected, Yuna said slowly. Our families, without ever meeting. It seems that way. She watched the river. I'm supposed to be married off by the end of the year. My father has been in negotiations with the head of the Busan branch. A man named Choi who is 53 years old and has already buried 2 wives. Her voice was perfectly even. It's a strategic merger. I understand the logic. Do you? I understand it. That doesn't mean I accept it. Emeka said nothing, but he didn't look away. He stayed. That was the thing no one had quite expected. including Emeka himself. Jae-won offered him a security consultant role, temporary, the old man said, but in the way that suggested temporary was a negotiating position. The park conflict was escalating. 3 of Jae-won's outer ring businesses had been attacked in the same week. Someone inside the syndicate was leaking information. Emeka was good at finding things that were hidden. It was the skill set that made him valuable and also, sometimes, the thing that made him dangerous to have around. He found the leak in 11 days. A middle management accountant named Bae, who had gambling debts the park network had quietly purchased. The man was handled quietly. The leak stopped. Jae-won looked at him across the desk in his study and said, "You are not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "A soldier for hire. Someone I could use and dismiss." The old man's fingers interlaced on the desk. "You're something else." "I'm exactly what I appear to be." "Yes, that's what I mean." Jae-won paused. "My daughter speaks of you." The sentence landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. "Your daughter is perceptive," Emeka said carefully. "She is. She gets it from her mother." Something moved in the old man's face, brief and unguarded. "Her mother was the one person I never lied to. In 40 years of the life I've lived, she was the one honest thing." He looked at Emeka. "Yuna is like her in that. She cannot be managed. She can only be met." The conversation ended there. But Emeka drove home that night with the feeling that something had shifted in the architecture of his life. It happened the way most real things happen, not in a dramatic moment but in 100 small ones. Coffee on the terrace became a habit. Then conversations that lasted past midnight. Then evenings where the entire Seoul household staff would conspicuously find reasons to be elsewhere, leaving the two of them in the kitchen while Yuna attempted to teach Emeka how to make doenjang jjigae, and Emeka patiently corrected her grip on the knife because she was going to cut herself and he would not be responsible for that. "You're very bossy for someone I outrank in this house," she told him. "You don't outrank me on knife safety. That's not a real category." "It is in my world." She laughed, and the sound of it did something to his chest that he didn't have military vocabulary for. They talked about everything and nothing. About her years in Geneva, lonely and gilded and pretending not to be lonely. About his years in the army, the things he'd seen, the things he'd done that he didn't look at directly anymore. About her mother, who had loved flowers and hated opera. About his mother, who had raised him alone after his father's death and never let him feel the absence as a wound. "She sounds remarkable," Yuna said one night. "She would like you," Emeka said, and then stopped, because he hadn't meant to say that, hadn't meant to open that door. Yuna looked at him across the kitchen counter. The lights were low. Outside, Seoul hummed its perpetual night music. She looked at him the way she always looked at him, directly without performance, and said, "Would she?" "Yes." His voice was very quiet. "She would say you have the kind of eyes that don't hide." A long silence. "Emeka." "I know," he said. "I know what I am here. I know what the boundaries of this are." "Do you?" She moved around the counter. He was very still, that trained stillness, that control, but she was not a woman who had ever been particularly impressed by walls, even the ones built from discipline and honor. She stopped in front of him and looked up, and what was in her face was not performance, not calculation. "Because I'm not sure I do." He reached up very slowly and brushed a strand of hair from her temple, from the place where the bruise had faded now, weeks ago, but his hand remembered where it had been. Her breath caught. "Your father," he said. "My father is not in this kitchen." "Yuna." "I know," she said softly. "I know." And she stepped back, and he let her, and they both stood there in the charged silence of something that had been named without words and now could not be unnamed. Park Hyun-sik was not a man who accepted setbacks gracefully. He had underestimated the CO response. He had not accounted for the Nigerian, and those 2 failures had cost him 4 men, 3 weeks of operational planning, and, most critically, his reputation for precision. In the circles where Park moved, reputation was currency, and his had just been devalued. He sat in his office on the 43rd floor of a building he owned legally, under a name no prosecutor had been able to definitively connect to the Park network, and he thought about what it meant to teach a lesson that could not be ignored. He thought about CO Yuna. He thought, If the first kidnapping was a message, what would a second one be? He picked up his phone and called a man whose services were considerably more expensive than those he'd used the first time. "I need information," Park said, "about the woman, her habits, her patterns, and the man who's been attached to her, former Nigerian military, goes by Okafor. I want to know everything." He paused, listening. "No," he said. "This time we're not sending a message. This time we finish it." Emeka noticed the tale on a Thursday. He was driving Una back from a meeting at her father's legal firm, one of the legitimate businesses, inheritance law and corporate restructuring, when the silver sedan that had been 3 cars behind them for the last 4 kilometers turned when they turned, and then turned again. He said nothing. His hands remained relaxed on the wheel. His eyes catalogued: license plate, body type, single occupant visible, professional interval maintenance. Not amateur. "Your phone," he said quietly. "Turn it off." Una glanced at him. She read his voice correctly. She always read him correctly, and turned her phone off without asking why. Then she looked in the side mirror and said, equally quietly, "Silver sedan." "Yes." "How long?" "At least since the firm. Possibly since we left the house this morning." Her jaw tightened. Not with fear, with something colder. "Park." "Probably." "What do we do?" He didn't take them home. He took them to one of her father's secondary properties, a safe house in Mapogu, nondescript, the kind of building that looked like 10,000 other buildings in Seoul. He made 3 additional turns, broke the tail on the second, confirmed it on the third. He called J1's head of security from a burner phone. Then he called J1 himself. The old man's voice was granite. "How long have they been watching her?" "Unknown. The tale today was professional. This isn't the same crew as before." Silence. Then, "Park has brought in outside contractors. That's my read. I'll increase her detail." Respectfully, Emeka chose his words. "More bodies may not be the answer. More bodies are visible. Visible security tells Park exactly how worried you are and where to press." A long pause. "What would you suggest?" "Let me move her. Somewhere unexpected. Small footprint, no advance notice. Give me control of her schedule for 2 weeks while your people identify Park's contractors." Another pause. Longer this time. "You're asking me to trust you with my daughter. I'm asking you to trust me with a security problem. Your daughter is not a thing to be protected, Mr. Seo. She's a person who knows how to take care of herself in most situations. I'm asking to handle the situations she shouldn't have to." A silence that felt like it had weight. 2 weeks, J1 said. "And Okafor," a pause. "Bring her back to me." "I will." He brought her to Jeju Island. Not a resort. A small house in the interior, inland, owned by a former colleague of Emeka's who was currently in Lagos and had no problem with the arrangement. It was simple. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, a wooden porch with a view of green hills, the sound of wind through orium grass. Una stood on the porch that first evening and breathed. "I haven't been somewhere quiet in." She stopped. "I don't remember when. It's good to be somewhere quiet sometimes." She turned and looked at him. He was leaning against the porch railing, watching the hills, and the evening light did something to his face that she had to look away from because it made her feel things that were complicated and irreversible. "Emeka," she said. Why are you still here? In Korea, your contract ended months ago. You could have gone back to Lagos." He was quiet for a moment. "I know. That's not an answer." He turned his head and looked at her. The light was going gold now. Somewhere in the hills, something was calling. A bird or wind through grass, she couldn't tell. His eyes were very dark and very steady, and she had never in her life met anyone who was so entirely themselves, so completely without performance or pretense. "You know why," he said. She did know. She had known for weeks. That didn't make the knowing simple. "My father has an arrangement," she said. "Choi, the Busan Alliance. I know about Choi. He's not a bad man. He's not." She stopped, started again. "All my life, I have been something to be arranged, to be placed. I thought I had made peace with it." She looked at the hills. "I hadn't." He straightened from the railing. He crossed the porch until he was close. Not touching but close, and she could feel the warmth of him, the solid reality of him, and she had to tilt her face up to look at him. "What do you want?" he asked. "Not what's been arranged. Not what's strategic. What do you want, Yuna?" Nobody had ever asked her that question and actually waited for the answer. She reached up and put her hand against his chest, over his heart, feeling it beat, slower and steadier than she would have expected from someone in this moment. And she said, "I want this to be a thing that is allowed to exist." He covered her hand with his. His thumb traced her knuckles, the place where the zip tie marks had long since healed. "Then let it exist," he said. He kissed her the way she had somehow always known he would, with complete intention, no hesitation, as if the decision had been made some time ago and this was simply the execution. Her hands went to his shoulders. His arms came around her, careful and then not careful. Behind them, the Jeju hills went dark with the coming night, and Seoul was 100 kilometers away, and for the first time in 26 years, Seo Yuna felt uncurried, uncatalogued, entirely, simply herself. If this story is giving you everything you came for, pause real quick and smash that like button. It tells the algorithm this is the kind of content worth spreading. And if you're not subscribed yet, do it now. You don't want to miss where this goes. They had 9 days. 9 days that were also in the architecture of what came after, the foundation of something unshakable, even though neither of them knew yet how much they would need it to be unshakable. They cooked together in the small kitchen, badly and happily, arguing about whether Nigerian pepper soup or Korean sundae was the correct cure for a cold Emeka one, but only because he made the pepper soup first and Yuna conceded it was, objectively, extraordinary. They walked the Orium trails at dawn, Yuna setting a pace that confirmed her claim about the track career. They sat on the porch in the evenings and talked in a way that felt like filling in all the years they hadn't known each other. His mother, her mother, his deployment scars and her boarding school loneliness, what they each believed about justice and family and whether loyalty was a virtue or a trap. "Both," Emeka said, "depending on who you're loyal to. My father would say loyalty is everything. Your father built an empire on loyalty. He's not wrong in his context. And in your context?" He thought about it. "In the army, loyalty saved my life 3 times. And it also put me in positions I had to live with afterward." He paused. "I'm loyal to people, not to systems or organizations. The people I would go back for, that's a short list. But it's absolute." She looked at him. "Am I on it?" He looked back at her steadily. "You know you are." The 9th evening, his phone rang. He took it inside, spoke for 4 minutes, came back to the porch. "We need to go back," he said. "Tomorrow morning." She read his face. "What happened?" "Park has made a move. Directly against your father's shipping operation. It escalated." "Is my father?" "He's fine. But he needs you home and he needs me." She nodded. The 9 days closed behind them like a door. What greeted them in Seoul was a war that had stopped being cold. Park Hyun-sik had spent the weeks of their absence efficiently. 3 of Jae-won's senior lieutenants had been arrested on charges that were clearly manufactured, but manufactured with evidence that someone inside the syndicate had provided. 2 warehouses. 1 cargo ship, seized by customs with a tip-off that had come from somewhere intimate with Jae-won's operations. There was a second mole. Emeka spent 72 hours mostly without sleep, methodically working backward through every person who had known enough to provide the specific information that had been leaked. Jae-won's senior counsel sat in the mansion's war room and watched him work with the particular expression of men who were not accustomed to being observed by outsiders but had been told, by Jae-won himself, to allow it. Yuna stayed close. Not in the war room, her father had tried to exclude her, and she had sat down in a chair and looked at him with an expression that was, Emeka thought, extremely her mother's, and Jae-won had said nothing further. She watched and she listened. She had a law degree she was never supposed to use, and a mind shaped by 2 languages and a childhood spent watching her father navigate the spaces between power. She noticed things. On the 2nd day, she slid a piece of paper across the table to Emeka. He looked at it. A name, and next to it a set of meeting dates she'd cross-referenced from calendars she'd been given access to, the legitimate business calendars, the ones anyone in the family could see. He looked at her. She looked back, unblinking. The name on the paper was Kim Dong-soo, her father's personal assistant for 11 years. "Show me your reasoning," Emeka said quietly. She walked him through it in 15 minutes, clean, precise, devastating in its logic. She had seen the pattern in the meeting schedules, the gaps, the information corridors. Emeka took the paper to J1. The old man looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at his daughter. Something moved across his face, complex and private, and he said quietly, "Your mother would have done the same thing." Kim Dong-soo was removed from the operation that night. The leak stopped, and Park Hyun-sik, 2 days later, found that the information pipeline he'd been drinking from had run dry. Emeka found Jae-won alone in his study the following evening. The old man was sitting with a glass of scotch he wasn't drinking, looking at a framed photograph on his desk that Emeka couldn't see from the doorway. "Come in," Jae-won said without looking up. Emeka entered, stood, did not sit until the old man gestured. "You love her," Jae-won said, still not a question. The man seemed constitutionally incapable of asking questions he already knew the answers to. Emeka met his gaze. "Yes." Jae-won turned the photograph on his desk so Emeka could see it. A woman, younger than the pictures Yuna had shown him, mid-30s, smiling, with eyes that were Yuna's eyes. Her name was Ji-young. "We were married for 22 years before she died." He was quiet for a moment. "I was not an easy man to be married to. I am not a man who should have been loved as thoroughly as she loved me." Emeka said nothing. "Yuna has her mother's capacity for it," Jae-won said, "for loving without calculation. It is her greatest strength and the thing that has made her most dangerous to protect." He turned the photograph back. "I have spent 6 years arranging her future. The Choi alliance," he stopped. "It would be good strategy. It would also be the wrong thing." A long silence. "I am not a man who asks permission," Jae-won said. "In my world, one doesn't. But I will ask you this, Okafor, not as a mafia boss, but as a father." He looked directly at him. "What do you intend?" "To ask her to marry me," Emeka said, quietly. "Absolutely. With your blessing if you give it. Without if you don't, though I would prefer it." Jae-won looked at him for what felt like a very long time. "The Choi alliance can be restructured," the old man said finally, as though this were a logistical matter being resolved. "There are other terms. I understand. You understand what marrying my daughter means. The world she comes from. What will follow you both. I've spent 12 years in environments where following was the nature of the work," Emeka said. "I'm not afraid of what follows." Jae-won studied him. Then he picked up his scotch and drank it and set the glass down. "She'll say yes before you finish asking," the old man said. "She gets impatience from her mother too." He asked her on the porch of the Hanamdong mansion. 2 weeks later, at sunrise over coffee. He didn't kneel. Not because he didn't want to, but because he thought she'd find the theater of it more amusing than moving, and this wasn't a theatrical moment. He just turned to her, ring in his hand. Simple white gold. A single dark stone because he had paid attention. He always paid attention. And said, "Seo Yuna, I would like to spend the rest of my life finding out what happens next with you. Will you marry me?" She looked at the ring, then at him. Her eyes were doing the complicated thing they sometimes did, bright, full, trying to contain something too large for containment. "My father approved this," she said. "He did. He must like you very much. He's never liked anyone. He likes that I'm direct. He likes that you're not afraid of him. I respect him. That's different from afraid." She took the ring from his hand and looked at it. And then she looked at him, and what was in her face made Emeka's chest do the thing it had no military vocabulary for. "Yes," she said. "Obviously yes. They should have had more time." But Park Hyun-sik was a man who had been humiliated by careful patience, and he had decided that patience was over. The night of the engagement dinner, small, family-only, quiet in the way of people who understand that the world outside is watching, 3 things happened in succession. The first, a shooting at one of Jae-won's outer business fronts that left 2 men in hospital. The second, an anonymous tip to every major media outlet in Seoul that Seo Jae-won, longtime suspected criminal patriarch, had authorized violence against a legitimate business competitor, with photographs that were convincingly fabricated and had clearly taken significant resources to produce. The third, a phone call to Emeka's private number that only 3 people had. The voice on the other end was smooth and measured. Okafor, I think we should meet. Emeka looked at the number. Looked at Yuna across the room. She was watching him with those eyes that saw everything. When? He said. Now would be ideal. Come alone, or I put those photographs in front of prosecutors tonight. You know what happens to the old man when that lands. He looked at Yuna. She had crossed the room and was standing beside him, reading his face, reading the edge in his stillness. Don't go alone, she said, before he could say anything. He'll burn your father. He'll burn my father anyway. He's not offering a deal, Emeka. He's offering a trap. She was right. He knew she was right. Park had been a step ahead for weeks, and now he was pulling a move that looked like a door but was a wall. If Emeka went alone, they took him. If he didn't go, the media package dropped and J1's legal exposure was catastrophic. He said, into the phone, I'll come. But I want a face-to-face, just us. No contractors. Of course, Park said. And in his voice was the smile of a man who had decided the game was over. He went. But he didn't go alone, not quite. He went with J1's head of security positioned 3 blocks away, with 2 of his own contacts placed at angles Park's people wouldn't check, and with a wire he was not sure would survive a pat-down but was worth the attempt. Park's people patted him down. They took his weapons. They missed the wire. The meeting was at a hotel penthouse in Yongsan, Park's theater, Park staging. He sat across a glass table from Park Hyun-sik, who was younger than Emeka had expected, mid-30s, handsome in the practiced way of someone who understood that appearance was a tool, and who looked at Emeka the way someone looks at a problem they're confident they've solved. You're interesting, Park said. I'll admit that. An African soldier in the middle of a Korean succession war. That's not a story you expect. What do you want? Simple. Walk away. Take the girl if you want her. I have no particular use for Seo Yuna anymore now that the old man is about to face a legal catastrophe. Just remove yourself from the board. Stop being a resource the Seo family can use. And if I don't? I have 17 years of your fiancé's father's business on a server that I give to prosecutors tomorrow morning. Park smiled. The old man goes away. The syndicate fractures. Yuna inherits a legal disaster and a broken organization. He tilted his head. Walk away. It's the pragmatic choice. Emeka looked at him. He thought about 12 years in special forces. He thought about the particular quality of men who were certain they had one. You made a mistake, Emeka said. Park's expression didn't change. Did I? You assumed my motivation was self-preservation, and that COJ1's vulnerability was his legal exposure. Those are facts, not assumptions. You also assumed, Emeka said, that you were the only person in this room who'd done their research. He saw it then, the first flicker of something in Park's eyes. Not quite fear. Something adjacent to it. In the last 3 weeks, Emeka said, while you were preparing that media package and buying prosecutors and running your contractors, I was doing something else. I was mapping your organization. Every account. Every shell company. Every transaction your legitimate businesses ran through the same banks your illegal ones use. He paused. Turns out the thing about being an outsider is that people don't expect you to be looking. And that server you mentioned, the one with 17 years of J1's business, it sits on a network with a very particular firewall signature. A silence. My people have been inside it for 6 days, Emeka said. What's on it now isn't what you put there. The silence in the penthouse was the kind that precedes something irreversible. Park moved first. His hand went under the table and Emeka moved faster, because Emeka had been trained for exactly this, the moment when a room changes from a conversation to something else. He came over the table and had Park's arm locked before the gun cleared the holster. And when Park's security came through the door 30 seconds later, they found their employer in a position that made clear how the rest of the evening would proceed. And from outside, down the street, down through a wire that had survived a pat-down, J1's people moved. What followed was not clean, nothing real ever is. There were days of back-channel negotiations, of evidence packages landing in front of law enforcement with careful placement, of Park's organization being systematically dismantled not through violence but through the kind of strategic pressure that left nothing to prosecute the Seo family with while providing ample material about Park's network. Park Hyun-sik did not go to prison. Men like him rarely did, directly. But his organization was broken. His resources were frozen. His contractors dissolved back into anonymity when the money stopped. He became, in the language of the underworld, small. And J1, who had spent 30 years building an empire on cold patience, looked at the wreckage of his most dangerous rival and said nothing publicly. In private, alone with Emeka in his study, he said simply, "You should have come to me 12 years ago. I didn't know you existed 12 years ago." No, the old man looked at him. But the world has a way of arranging introductions. They were married on a Saturday in early spring. Small ceremony. Intentionally, stubbornly small, because Yuna had spent her whole life in gilded arrangements for other people's benefit, and this was hers, and she wanted it to feel like what it was. The Hanamdong garden, white flowers she'd chosen herself. Her father quiet in the front row with the expression of a man who was feeling something significant and had very few tools for it. Emeka stood at the garden arch and watched her walk toward him, in a dress that was simple and exactly right, and had the clear, grounded, certain feeling of a man who has arrived somewhere he did not know he was traveling toward. She stopped in front of him. "You're staring," she said softly. "You're worth staring at. You're terrible at romantic speeches. I've been told." She took his hands. Her father's officiant, a man who knew better than to ask too many questions, began to speak, and Yuna looked at Emeka the way she always looked at him, without performance, without calculation, with the particular directness that had made him fall in love with her in a rat-infested warehouse when she was zip-tied to a chair and still issuing threats. When it was time for vows, he kept his short. "I will find you," he said. "Wherever they take you. Whatever comes. I will come for you. I will always come for you." Her eyes went bright. "I know," she said. "You already did." But the story didn't end at the altar. Because the world Emeka had married into did not deal in endings, only evolutions. 3 months after the wedding, J1 called them both into his study. He looked older than he had a year ago, or perhaps simply more tired, the weight of decades settling differently now that some of the weight had been lifted. "I've been thinking about succession," he said. Yuna went very still. "Appa, I built this for your mother. I told myself I built it for you. But your mother would have told me. Your mother did tell me the last year she was alive, that what I built required a particular kind of person to hold it." He looked at them both. "Not a man who does it because it is expected of him. Not a daughter placed in it because the structure requires an heir." He paused. "Someone who chooses it. Who understands what it is and chooses it anyway." Silence. "I'm not choosing what you think," Yuna said carefully. "I know. And I'm not asking you to." The old man looked at Emeka. "There are legitimate arms of this organization. The shipping, the property, the legal consulting. Things that operate above board and require management that isn't what I've spent my career managing." He let the sentence sit there. "I would like to restructure. Separate the legitimate from the rest. Keep the rest contained and quiet while the legitimate grows." His eyes moved between them. "That restructuring requires someone I trust. Someone who is not part of the old patterns. Someone who came from the outside and sees it clearly." Emeka and Yuna looked at each other. In her eyes, he saw the question. "Is this what you want?" In his, she saw the answer. "Is it what you want? Give us time to discuss it," Emeka said to J1. "You have time," the old man said. And then he smiled briefly, the rare thing it was. "You have all the time. That's the thing about building something that lasts. You do it for the people who come after." They stood on the terrace that night, their terrace now, the Hanamdong mansion that was becoming something new under their occupation of it, looking out at the Han River. "You don't have to," Yuna said. "He's not asking you to. He's genuinely offering a choice." "I know. It would mean staying. Permanently. I know that too." She looked at him. He was watching the river with the particular quality of stillness that meant he was actually thinking, not performing thinking. "When they first sent me to Geneva," she said quietly, "I cried every night for the first month. I was 10 years old and I was certain I had been shipped away because I was inconvenient. It took me until I was about 23 to understand that my father sent me there because it was the only way he knew to protect me from the world he'd built." She paused. "He was wrong, by the way. You can't protect someone from the world by removing them from it." "No," Emeka agreed. But I understand him better now. What he built and why. And what it costs and whether those costs were. She stopped. I don't think I want to run away from it anymore. From what he built. I want to change it. Make it into something that doesn't ask those costs of the next generation. He turned from the river and looked at her. That would take years, he said. Yes. And the parts that aren't legitimate, they don't dissolve cleanly. There are people. There are obligations. There are. I know what it is, she said evenly. I grew up in it, Emeka. I know exactly what it is. And I know exactly how long it takes to change the shape of something that big. She held his gaze. But I didn't marry a man who was afraid of the long work. Something shifted in his face. Not a smile exactly, but the thing that came before a smile, the private thing. No, he said. You didn't. She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers. We do it together, she said. Everything together. That's the only way I'll agree to it. Together, he said. No hesitation. The Han River moved under the city lights, silver and constant, the way rivers move, indifferent to everything that happens on their banks, outlasting all of it, keeping none of its secrets. They stood there, the two of them, Nigerian soldier and Korean Mafia princess, building something that had no category yet, something that would take years to name. Behind them, the city hummed. Ahead of them, a future that was uncertain and alive and entirely their own. And that, for now, was everything. If you made it all the way here, if you were with us from that warehouse to this river, then you already know this channel is where the good stories live. Drop in the comments. Who's your favorite character? Are you Team Emeka or Team Yuna? Or are you Team, they are the same person in different forms? Because honestly, that might be right. Subscribe if you're not already. Like this video if the story hit you the way we intended it to. Share it with someone who needs a story that doesn't flinch. We'll see you in the next one.